The Senate confirmation hearings for President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet, which begin this morning with one of his most controversial selections, Pete Hegseth, Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense. Members of the Senate Armed Services Committee huddled for a briefing on the FBI background check into Hegseth yesterday. Now, as is customary, only the heads of the committee, Republican Chair Roger Wicker and Ranking Member Jack Reed, were given physical access to the full FBI report. They then were responsible for relaying those findings to all other committee members. This, as NBC News reports, the contents of the report may be lacking. The FBI's security check of Hegseth does not include interviews with any of his ex-wives or the woman who accused him of sexual assault in 2017. That's according to three sources with direct knowledge of the background check. Hegseth was denied any wrongdoing in that case, and the local district attorney declined to file charges, saying there was no proof beyond a reasonable doubt the assault took place. Democratic lawmakers are sounding the alarm that there may be additional key information left out of the report.
I only know that some of the folks that have, the women in his past women in his life have wanted to be interviewed, but have not been interviewed by the vetters.
The transition team has slow-walked and stonewalled us, but we do know that there are significant gaps in that background check. It's incomplete, and so far as we know, inadequate. And I am deeply concerned that there are facts that so far have been hidden from this committee. What are they hiding that they won't give us this kind of information?
Meanwhile, the New York Times reports that investigators reached out to Pete Hegseth's second ex-wife, Samantha Hegseth. The couple were married from 2010 until 2018, and according to the Times, FBI investigators had an initial perfunctory conversation with her on January 8th, according to people familiar with the apprised of the report. Ms. Hegseth then made multiple attempts to contact the Bureau for a more substantive discussion, but her calls were not returned last week, said those with knowledge of the investigation who were not authorized to speak publicly on the matter. Let's bring in the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale, and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of The Washington Post, Eugene Robinson.
Thank you all for being with us. Let's start. John Lemire, let me ask you, what is the reaction, and I guess, to this very incomplete FBI report, but also, more importantly, a lot of people asking, how do you have an FBI report on Pete Hegseth when those with the most explosive charges aren't even a part of that FBI report, and you have one person trying to contact the FBI repeatedly who doesn't get her calls returned?
Yeah, the report seems extraordinarily incomplete, and we just heard a little bit of real Democratic outrage yesterday about that fact. Let's recall, of course, that the Trump team initially for weeks stonewalled the idea of any background checks, certainly by the FBI, as the president-elect began selecting his possible cabinet members. They wanted to do the background checks through a private company. There were real concerns there that wouldn't be complete. They eventually relented, let the FBI take part, but it seems here not able to talk to every pertinent person, including these ex-wives and those who suggested Hegseth behaved inappropriately with them. So I think right from the get-go in this hearing today, slated for this morning, the first of a series of high-profile and some incendiary hearings, we're going to hear from Democrats crying foul on this very process. Now, Pete Hegseth himself, his testimony, prepared testimony, leaked to Axios, other places. We know he's going to say it's time for someone who served in combat. He is a veteran, to lead the department, to lead the Pentagon. He's going to talk about his mistakes in his life. He says he's found God. His new wife has changed his behavior. We know in the confirmation interviews with senators, he said he'd stop drinking and the like. But there are real questions here he's going to have to face, and some pointed questions from Democrats about his personal conduct as well as his qualifications. And few suggest that this Fox News contributor would have the bona fides to lead this department. We will see where this goes. Whip count, Republicans are growing more and more confident they have the votes, but no one knows for sure as to where this goes next. And there are a few eyes, certainly Joni Ernst, a couple other Republicans seen as the key votes here. And I think a lot of people say still up in the air. Well, it depends what happens today at the hearing.
Well, yeah, and Ali, please feel free to give us more insight on what you're hearing on the Hill. But again, the question that's raised here is, who directed the FBI not to talk to the person with the most explosive testimony against Pete Hegseth, the charges of rape against Pete Hegseth? The police, again, we've said the police did not press the charges. But the fact that you don't have this woman that has come forward with all of this information about that California event, and then again, one of his ex-wives trying to reach the FBI and not getting return calls. So, is there any suggestion that that the Trump transition team directed the FBI to what it could or could not investigate, or would that be the Republicans in the Senate that would tell the FBI don't talk to the people that may have the most germane evidence against Pete Hegseth?
Well, we don't know at this point if that direction was given, but it's important to remember that, as one of our reporters who's been covering this said to me yesterday on Way Too Early, the client for the people doing the investigation is not Congress. The job is not to give Congress the most information possible. The job is to do the investigating at the direction of the client, in this case, the Trump transition team. And so that's going to be important for us to keep in mind when we watch Democrats talk about the gaps in this report. And I think we're right to lay out how glaring they absolutely are. And it's something that Democrats are now going to use in their lines of questioning. They were already going to talk about the sexual assault allegation. They were already going to talk about the potential themes around his ex-wives. But now we're going to see them not just talk about that, but also ask the question of why this wouldn't have been included in the kind of report that senators have gotten quite used to getting. Even if they're not reading the report itself, being briefed in full on what's in the report. And it's clear these are the rules of this committee. That's not the thing that's odd here. The thing that's odd here is that there are pieces of this report that seem very obvious to have investigators at least ask questions about and bring back to Congress. And that wasn't done here. And that's just the gaps in the report on the sexual violence and sexual assault allegation, and also things that his ex-wives might have said. But then there's also the misuse of funds at veterans organizations. There are the allegations that NBC News has reported on that he was abusing alcohol. All of that is going to be in this hearing that is going to be quite explosive on Capitol Hill.
Gene, this is an extraordinary moment in terms of Senate hearings, I would imagine. There is no director of the FBI. Chris Wright has resigned. There's an acting director. We don't know what the FBI is doing in terms of pursuing any extraordinary or extra questioning of potential witnesses, people who are willing to give testimony about Pete Hegseth. But we do know that the post is not like the Postmaster General. It's the Secretary of Defense. In a very dangerous world. And on paper, and according to everything you hear from, including some Republicans, Pete Hegseth is extraordinarily unqualified. So where does the Senate committee go from here with not as much information as they need and not as much cooperation, perhaps, from the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Well, it's a very good question because the hearing is today, right? So they're supposed to have the information. The committee chairman and the ranking member have already looked at the background reports. They're ready to go, and so it's really frustrating to have to talk about this investigation in retrospect, but that's kind of where we are now, unless something extraordinary happens, and there's some attempt to sort of go back into this. Look, Merrick Garland is still the Attorney General, right? I mean, and Joe Biden is still the president. It's not as if the transition has already happened. So I am really curious as to why, with a job this important, it's not just these allegations against Hegseth. It's the whole question of whether he is remotely capable of doing what is really one of the most important jobs in our government, a job that's doubly important now because there are all these questions about the readiness of the U.S. Defense Department if perish the thought we ever had to fight or deter a major war. And you know, these are big questions about what we're doing militarily to counter the rise of China. And
right.
Is Pete Hegseth the guy to figure that out? And I want to know more about that.
Well, I've got to say, again, all the character issues aside, I can tell you there's not a single person in Washington, D.C. that I've talked to that thinks that he's qualified to run the Pentagon. Again, all character questions aside, that's something that Joni Ernst knows. She knows he's not qualified to run the Pentagon. That's something that John Thune knows. He knows Pete Hegseth is not qualified to run the Pentagon. That's something Mitch McConnell knows. That's something that Lisa Murkowski knows. That's something that Susan Collin knows. It's something, of course, that Todd Young, one of the most serious thinkers on national defense issues, knows. So, again, all of these character questions aside, these so-called John Tower questions, all of those aside, everybody knows the underlying truth that nobody will be served. I mean, the DOD will not be served by this. Americans will not be served by it. The armed forces won't be served by it. Even the commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, ultimately will not be served by having somebody running the DOD that's ill-equipped just because of experience or lack thereof of running the DOD. Still, the question this morning regarding the start of this hearing, Jonathan Lemire, has to go back to why didn't the FBI ask the most basic questions from the most germane witnesses? Were they instructed not to by somebody, or do you think they were doing it because they didn't want to offend the incoming administration?
That is a great question. Now, to Ali's point, the parameters are usually set by the transition team. So, and that would be the case here as well. So there's likely, some of this at least, is instructions from the Trump team. The specifics we don't know. We're still reporting. The New York Times has broke the story, pieces of the story last night. They don't have either. There is a suggestion. We know Tammy Duckworth. We played a little bit of sound from her a few moments ago, the senator from Illinois. I was just reading further from what she had to say yesterday. She also wondered that in some cases, the women involved may not have wanted to come forward because they were fearful of their safety or safety of their children. So I think that's an element here. But we know that's not the case, at least, for the one ex-wife who proactively reached out to the FBI. So why she was rebuffed, why she was ignored, that will be one of the mysteries that I think, we heard this from Senator Blumenthal as well. I was just reading his notes, that we'll probably hear in the first minutes of the hearing today. Why did it happen this way?